A Chinese city threatened the death penalty for COVID. Officials try to stop Tiananmen memorials in Hong Kong. And Chinese jets harass Canada and Australia. That and more on this week's China News Headlines. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. This episode is sponsored by Incogni. You probably know that companies are collecting your personal data, but you may not realize just how many. Dozens, maybe hundreds, most of which you've never heard of. And you have no idea what they're doing with it. Incogni helps stop them, and I'll explain more at the end. So, if you are infected with COVID and are caught illegally entering China, you can be executed. At least that's what one Chinese city announced last week. Fangchenggang City is here in Guangxi Province, on the border with Vietnam. They take social distancing seriously. Most places want you to stay 6 feet away, but these guys want you to stay 6 feet under. Because part of Fangchenggang borders Vietnam, there's a lot of people smuggling that goes on. And on June 2nd, the city issued an official epidemic control notice saying anyone who illegally crosses the border while infected with COVID or anyone who smuggles those people in will be charged with endangering public safety. The maximum punishment for endangering public safety is the death penalty. It seemed a little harsh. China's border cities have had a tough time with the Chinese Communist Party's zero COVID policy. They've had a lot of lockdowns. Fangchenggang was locked down from February through May. Some border cities have some creative solutions to all the illegal crossings, like using geese as border control agents. But Fangchenggang just skipped past the geese and went straight for the death penalty. Although if you ever pissed off a goose, death might not be far behind. Geese may be covered with feathers, but they're filled with pure rage. Speaking of rage, that's how Chinese social media users reacted after this notice went up. After the backlash, local authorities took the notice down. And a few days later, the Communist Party sacked one of the city's party leaders. I guess even the Chinese regime thought he went too far. Can you really blame that guy, though? The Chinese Communist Party has done some rather extreme things in the name of fighting COVID. He probably just thought he was taking initiative. After all, when authorities start welding people into their homes to ensure lockdowns, or even put people screaming into tiny metal boxes, that doesn't exactly say people's lives are important. I really hope we don't get demonetized for showing that again. Every time we do, YouTube demonetizes us. Please support our work on Patreon and locals. But it's like the party did everything to fight COVID except tell the truth about COVID. That would have really helped in the beginning. The problem for the Chinese Communist Party is that its COVID theater is kind of falling apart. The government has tried to carefully curate how people see the pandemic, but reality as a way is seeping through. Too bad you can't weld the truth into a tiny metal box. I'm sure they've tried. Despite lockdowns in Shanghai officially ending, hundreds of thousands have not yet been allowed outside of their homes, while others have immediately been placed back under local lockdowns after a brief liberation that triggered shopping sprees and booze-fueled street parties. You know, public health with Chinese characteristics. Some had been in lockdown for 78 days. Now there's news that one Shanghai district with 2 million people is going to be locked down again. COVID testing is also becoming a normalized part of daily life in China. In some parts of China, COVID testing stations are on every corner. Some places require people to get tested every other day. Imagine you lean in to get tested and then boom, cat up the sleeve. I don't know why this is real. Anyway, residents must present a negative PCR test completed within 48 or 72 hours to ride the subway or enter a public facility, respectively. In other words, most people have to do 1 to 3 nucleic acid tests per week in order to maintain a normal life. All that is, of course, very expensive. And as I mentioned on a recent episode, local governments are going into massive debt trying to keep up. And coming up after the break, Hong Kong police are truly the worst. Welcome back. For over 30 years, people in Hong Kong openly commemorated the Tiananmen Square massacre and the 10,000 people who died. I'd show you the footage of the Tiananmen Square massacre, but YouTube always demonetizes us when we do. They also demonetize us when we talk about Hong Kong. I'm sensing a pattern. Here, I don't think they'd demonetize us for showing this footage. That works, right? Now, for the past 2 years, Hong Kong banned any kind of gathering to mark the massacre because of COVID. Of course, banning it this year because of COVID makes no sense. That's why they banned it just because. So I guess at least they're being honest about being repressive. That's nice of them. Hong Kong police were out in full force to enforce the ban. Victoria Park, where a candlelight vigil was held every year, was closed off. And police performed frequent searches of people to see if they were carrying candles. Candle searches? They're afraid of people carrying something you can get at Bath and Body Works. Bath and Body Works. For when you want to fight the power and smell amazing while doing it. But Hong Kongers still found their ways to show that no matter what pressure they get, they won't forget Tiananmen. This woman was wearing a yellow shirt that said, "Go Hong Kong," and was handing out blank pieces of paper. And yes, police tried to stop her. Again, blank pieces of paper. Meanwhile, students at the Chinese University of Hong Kong hid tiny Goddess of Democracy statues around campus. They represent the one erected in Tiananmen Square in 1989, as well as a replica of the statue that had been on the university's campus until the school suddenly removed it last year. And even though foreign consulates were told not to commemorate Tiananmen, the consulates of the United States and Finland, as well as the European Union, placed lighted candles by the windows of their Hong Kong offices. Candles? Those had better be for someone's birthday, or we're going to have a problem. Several other consulates posted messages on their websites. The Chinese Communist Party wants the world to forget the Tiananmen Square massacre. Inside mainland China, they've been pretty successful at making people forget. So much so that one of China's top live streamers was abruptly pulled off the air because he showed an ice cream cake in the shape of a tank. But according to an analyst at China Digital Times, his team weren't even aware of the June 4th incident in 1989 and thought it was any other ordinary day. That's what happens when you so thoroughly erase an event that people who weren't born yet know nothing about it, and then get in trouble for it. So at least one thing is clear. The Chinese Communist Party sure hasn't forgotten the Tiananmen Square massacre. And after the break, Chinese jets harass Canadian and Australian planes. Welcome back. The Chinese Communist Party's military is becoming increasingly aggressive. Well, increasingly aggressiver. That's like saying that a caterpillar is becoming increasingly vegan. That's just what they are. Canadian aircraft patrol the skies around Japan, enforcing sanctions on North Korea. Then this happened this week.
Fast and agile Chinese fighter jets are buzzing Canada's slower Aurora aircraft with razor-thin margins, frequently zooming past the planes a mere 20 to 100 feet away, creating enough turbulence alone that Canadian planes could be thrown off course.
So China's using fighter jets to play, "I'm not touching you, I'm not touching you." Real mature, China. But China clearly didn't want Australia to feel left out.
A chilling confrontation in the skies over the disputed South China Sea. On May 26, a RAF P-8 surveillance plane was on a routine exercise in international airspace over the South China Sea when it was intercepted by a Chinese J-16 jet fighter, which drew very close alongside and released flares. The warplane then accelerated, cut in front of the RAF jet and deployed a cloud of aluminium strips known as chaff, some of which entered the Australian plane's engines.
China has denied any wrongdoing because when have they ever admitted wrongdoing? And this kind of aggressive military behavior is something the Chinese Communist Party has used before, sometimes ending in disaster. In 2001, a Chinese jet flew too close to a US jet and actually crashed into it. The Chinese pilot was killed and the US jet was forced to land in China. leading to a diplomatic disaster. So, will China face any serious repercussions for its open military aggression against the West? Of course not, because there's a lot of money to be made in China. Despite all the rape, genocide, responsibility for a global pandemic, and open aggression against foreign countries and companies, foreign investors are flocking back to the China market. Helping that is the fact that the Biden administration is allowing U.S. investors to go ahead and keep their investments in blacklisted Chinese companies with ties to the Chinese military. Not sure if Bath & Body Works will be allowed in, though. Can't take the risk with all those candles. The Biden administration is also considering lifting Trump-era China tariffs to counter inflation. Hey, you know what might be better for fighting inflation? Curb rampant government spending and money printing. That might be better than easing off on an authoritarian regime that considers itself at war with the United States. But hey, I'm no expert. You know who is? U.S. Trade Representative Katherine Tai, and she says fighting inflation is a bit more complicated than cutting China tariffs. Really? Years of watching CNN and Fox News has convinced me that the president can just fix inflation and gas prices by pushing a button, but they choose not to because they're bad. Or good, depending on the president and the channel I'm watching. Meanwhile, a top Chinese economist has been saying if the U.S. sanctions China the way Russia has been sanctioned, China needs to seize the largest semiconductor maker in Taiwan. Yes, invade a thriving democracy to screw the U.S. out of microchips. To be fair, China will take any excuse to invade Taiwan. The Mexican pizza is back at Taco Bell. Guess it's time to seize Taiwan. The Biden administration responded to this threat with another round of astounding strategic ambiguity on Taiwan. This time by adding in the phrase, "We do not support Taiwan independence," to the State Department's official page on Taiwan. That phrase had been removed when the Biden administration updated the page in May. I thought it was a good sign. My hope has been misplaced. It's the latest in a long string of flip-flops.
Are you willing to get involved militarily to defend Taiwan if it comes to that?
Yes.
You are?
That's the commitment we made.
In a statement afterwards, a White House official insisting that Biden was not suggesting any change in existing U.S. policy.
Maybe Biden was saying the U.S. policy hasn't changed, but he himself would be willing to defend Taiwan. He just saw Top Gun Maverick and wants to get in on the action personally. But it's not just the U.S. that's being stupid on China. The UK Department of Defense is ignoring a U.S. ban and is once again purchasing Chinese-made drones. Don't worry, it's just a Chinese company that has links to the Chinese military. At this point, I think the only way to get the West to stop investing in China is if China actually takes over America and just seizes everyone's money. At least we'd be finally ethical. By violent force, which is essentially communism in a nutshell. And this episode has been sponsored by Incogni. Whenever you do anything online, there's a huge number of companies that collect your personal data. There are dozens here that are just collecting my data. These companies collect things like your name, your email, your address, and even your social security number. What are they doing with this personal data? They're buying it, selling it, and trading it to other companies to sell you products or create a profile of you. And when these companies get hacked, you could be in big trouble. And yes, I said when, not if. Because according to the former head of the NSA, China has hacked every major corporation in the US. So if your data is out there, it's not safe. And that's why you need to get your data taken offline right now. That's what Incogni does. Incogni forces these companies to delete your data. Just a few months after signing up, Incogni has already gotten my details removed from 19 of these data brokers, with 35 more in progress. And I didn't have to do anything after signing up. So check out Incogni using the link below or go to incogni.com/uncensored. The first 100 people to use the code uncensored will get 20% off. Get your personal data off the market with Incogni. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching China Uncensored.